My entitled son sold my classic car to fund a luxury weekend getaway, thinking his aging mother would just swallow the disrespect in silence. He felt untouchable in his perfect rent-free townhouse, completely forgetting whose name was actually on the property deed. He is flying back from Mexico tomorrow, entirely unaware that the home he thinks is his now belongs to absolute strangers. I am Loretta, 62 years old, a retired high school principal, and a widow who spent her entire life pouring everything into her only child. For decades, I navigated the unforgiving halls of the public education system, dealing with budget cuts, late-night board meetings, and endless paperwork, all to ensure my son Jamal would never have to struggle. My husband David left us a decade ago, but before he passed, we worked multiple jobs to make sure Jamal graduated college, completely debt-free. I raised my boy with faith, hard work, and what I truly believed was a deep sense of respect. But lately, observing him and his new wife Chloe, a 30-year-old lifestyle influencer who cares more about her social media aesthetics than her family, I started noticing deep cracks in the foundation I had built. Chloe always had a condescending remark about my traditional values and my modest way of living, and Jamal simply stood by and let her disrespect me. The true depth of that betrayal revealed itself on a perfectly clear Sunday morning. I had my church clothes on my purse in hand and a peaceful spirit as I walked out to my garage. I pressed the button to raise the door, ready to drive the meticulously restored 1969 Chevy Impala that had been my late husband's absolute pride and joy. David had rebuilt that engine with his own two hands, and sitting in it always made me feel close to him. When the door rolled up, my heart dropped into my stomach. The garage was completely empty. A cold panic gripped my chest because I thought someone had broken in. My hands shook as I reached for my phone to dial the police. But right at that exact moment, the screen lit up with a text message. It was from Jamal. I opened it and the words I read hit me like a bucket of ice water. Hey, Ma took the Chevy and sold it to a collector. Chloe and I needed the cash for a VIP weekend in Cabo. You barely drive it anyway. We will bring you back a souvenir. I stood there on the cold concrete, reading those selfish sentences over and over until the letters blurred through my tears. The sheer audacity left me completely breathless. My own flesh and blood had sneaked into my home, taken his dead father's most prized possession and sold it behind my back to fund a luxury vacation for a woman who constantly rolled her eyes at me. I was not just a mother reading a careless text from a thoughtless child. I was a woman realizing that the son I had sacrificed my youth and health for saw me as nothing more than an ATM he could empty whenever he pleased. The deep pain in my chest did not turn into sorrow. Instead, it quickly hardened into something much colder. It was the exact moment the forgiving mother stepped aside, and a woman demanding absolute justice took her place. I spent 35 years walking the waxed floors of public high schools, eventually working my way up to principal. It was demanding, exhausting work, but it was honest. When my husband David passed away, Jamal was just stepping into his freshman year of high school. I made a solemn promise to my late husband right there in that cold hospital room. I promised him that our boy would never start his adult life suffocating under the crushing weight of student loans. So I put my head down and I worked the long hours. I took on summer school administration duties. I tutored students on the weekends. And I clipped grocery coupons until my fingers cramped. I drove a sensible sedan that rattled when it hit 60 miles per hour, and I kept my hair in simple braids so I would not have to spend extra money at the salon. Every single spare dollar went straight into a college fund, and by the grace of God, it worked. Jamal walked across that university stage with a business degree in his hand and zero debt to his name. I was so incredibly proud of the man he was becoming. But then he met Chloe. Chloe is 30 years old, a white woman with perfect blonde highlights, who proudly calls herself a lifestyle influencer. She spends her days posting filtered pictures of expensive lattes and unboxing designer handbags for complete strangers on the internet. From the very first Sunday dinner Jamal brought her to my house, I could see right through that forced camera-ready smile. She walked into my modest, neatly kept home, and her eyes immediately did that subtle, sweeping judgment. She looked at my floral couch and my framed family photos like she had just stepped into a museum of things she would never associate herself with. Over the years, her dismissiveness only grew. She would make these little offhand, passive-aggressive comments about my traditional values. She called my budgeting habits cute and laughed at my insistence on cooking Sunday dinner from scratch instead of ordering from some overpriced fusion restaurant downtown. Chloe would look at my Sunday spread, the baked chicken, the greens, the cornbread that nourished my son his whole life, and wrinkle her nose, asking if I had anything that fit her strict, trendy diet. She treated my modesty not as a conscious choice, but as a lack of sophistication. She honestly believed that because I shopped at discount stores and wore sensible shoes, I was just some clueless, aging woman who had settled for a mediocre life. And the most heartbreaking part was watching Jamal, my smart, educated son, become completely blinded by her. He bent over backward to fit into her curated, materialistic world, slowly losing the grounding David and I had worked so hard to instill in him. When Jamal and Chloe finally got married, the harsh reality of their finances quickly clashed with the flawless image Chloe desperately needed to project online. They wanted the absolute peak of a luxury lifestyle. They wanted the stainless steel appliances, the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the prestigious address in the most upscale zip code in the city. But an influencer's highly inconsistent income and a junior corporate salary simply do not pay for million-dollar mortgages. They were drowning in expectations before they even started their life together. Seeing my son so stressed and overwhelmed, my motherly instincts took over, blinding my better judgment. Years ago, long before the neighborhood became the trendiest spot in the entire city, David and I had purchased a beautiful, spacious townhouse as a long-term investment. It was entirely paid off, generating a very nice, steady rental income for my retirement. But seeing Jamal struggle, I told my tenants I was not renewing their lease, and I handed those shiny keys over to my son and his new bride. I told them they could live there completely rent-free. All they had to do was cover their own utility bills and keep the place properly maintained. I truly thought I was giving them a massive head start, a solid foundation to build their marriage and save for their own future home. Instead, I gave them a grand stage for their delusions. It did not take long for Chloe to start treating the townhouse as her personal kingdom. She went online and posted endless house tour videos, bragging to her hundreds of thousands of followers about her stunning new home and her incredible eye for prime real estate. She invited her influencer friends over for lavish dinner parties, showing off the custom hardwood floors David and I had installed, claiming she picked them out herself. I would drop by to bring them some fresh groceries, only to find they had completely ripped out the antique brass cabinet pulls David had carefully installed, replacing them with cheap, modern matte black metal without ever once asking my permission. When I mentioned it, Chloe just laughed and said the old ones ruined her aesthetic. They bought obscenely expensive furniture on credit, just to fill the large rooms, living exactly like the wealthy homeowners they pretended to be. Jamal fell right in line, acting like a king in a castle he did not build. They became so consumed by their own daily performance that they completely forgot the reality of the situation. They forgot who paid the heavy property taxes every single year. They forgot who held the expensive insurance policy. And most dangerously of all, they completely forgot that my name, and only my name, was on the deed to that property. They got way too comfortable in a house they did not own, fatally underestimating the woman who actually held the keys. Looking back, the sale of my precious Chevrolet was not an isolated act of cruelty. It was simply the loudest explosion in a long string of quiet detonations I had been ignoring for over a year. The disrespect had seeped into my life slowly, like a leak under the floorboards, rotting the foundation of our relationship, before I even noticed the dampness. I thought about all the times Chloe complained about the townhouse I allowed them to live in, completely rent-free. She had the nerve to invite me over for coffee sit at the granite island I paid for, and sigh dramatically about how the custom oak cabinets were so outdated and completely ruined her neutral aesthetic. She actually asked me when I planned to finance a full kitchen remodel for them, as if I were their personal contractor. Then came the utility bills. Jamal started bringing me their past due notices, slapping them down on my kitchen table with a heavy sigh. He would tell me that since they were saving up to build their brand, it was only fair that I covered the electricity and water. He never asked, he demanded. And out of some misplaced maternal guilt, I wrote the checks. I convinced myself I was helping them get on their feet, even as they conveniently forgot to invite me to their lavish holiday parties. Last Thanksgiving, I sat alone in my living room, eating a frozen dinner, while they posted videos of themselves carving a turkey with Chloe's entire family in the townhouse I owned. But the car? How did he even get the title to sell my car? The realization hit my chest with the force of a physical blow. 5 months ago, Jamal came over unannounced with a sweet smile, insisting that I was working too hard and that he wanted to help organize my home office. I remember feeling so touched. I sat in the living room drinking tea, while my only son spent 3 hours alone in my study, supposedly filing my tax returns and insurance paperwork. He was not organizing my life. He was mapping out my assets. He found the physical title to the Impala in my safe, slipped it into his designer briefcase, and forged my signature. He forged the signature of the mother who had broken her back to give him everything. The depth of that deceit was suffocating. I had spent 35 years teaching young men and women about integrity, about doing the right thing when nobody was watching. Yet I had failed to see the thief sitting at my own dinner table. If he was willing to commit felony forgery to steal a classic car for a beach vacation, what else had he taken from that filing cabinet? What other legal documents had he photographed, copied, or stolen right out from under my nose? I could not just sit there in my empty garage and cry. Panic and adrenaline surged through my veins. I immediately ordered an Uber to take me to the townhouse. I needed to know exactly how much of my life had been compromised. Because I am the legal owner of the property, I still kept the master key on my keyring. The ride over felt like it took hours, my mind racing through every financial detail I had ever shared with my son. When I unlocked the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, the house was dead silent. The place was a disaster of discarded designer clothing, half-packed bags, and empty champagne bottles. They had clearly left for the airport in a massive, chaotic rush. I walked straight past the mess in the hallway and headed for the large glass dining table. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. There, sitting wide open and plugged into the wall, was Jamal's laptop. Next to it was a thick stack of printed papers in a manila folder. I approached the table slowly, almost afraid of what I was about to touch. I opened the folder first. The heavy legal jargon jumped off the page, but I did not need a law degree to understand what I was reading. It was a drafted petition for conservatorship. My breath caught in my throat. I looked at the laptop screen. Jamal had left his email inbox open. There was an entire chain of correspondence between my son, his wife, and a shady, aggressive family law attorney. I clicked through the messages, reading their monstrous plan, word by word. Jamal and Chloe were not just selling my car. They were actively drawing up paperwork to claim I was suffering from severe early-onset dementia. They had documented every minor thing I had ever misplaced or forgotten over the last 2 years, twisting innocent moments into fabricated evidence of my cognitive decline. Their ultimate goal was laid out in cold, calculating black and white. They planned to have me declared legally incompetent by a judge. Once Jamal secured the power of attorney, they were going to force me out of my primary home and put me into a cheap state-run nursing facility. They explicitly discussed how liquidating my house, my pension, and my investments would give them the capital they needed to launch Chloe's new lifestyle brand and buy a multi-million-dollar mansion of their own. I gripped the edge of the dining table to keep my knees from buckling. The sheer evil of it was paralyzing. They were discussing my life as if I were already a corpse, as if my decades of hard work were nothing more than a jackpot waiting to be cracked open. I was a healthy, sharp, fully capable 62-year-old woman, yet they were plotting to legally erase my existence. My own flesh and blood was planning to lock me away in a bleak, lonely institution, stripping away my freedom, my mind, and my dignity, just to fund his wife's vanity. Us two. I continued scrolling through the digital messages, my hands shaking so violently I could barely operate the mousepad. Then I found it. The smoking gun. It was a direct chat message from Chloe to Jamal, sent just the night before they left for Mexico. I read the words, and the last remaining fragment of my breaking heart turned to absolute stone. The message read, "Once we get back from Cabo, we will have the lawyer serve your mom the competency papers. She's too old and tired to fight back anyway. We will finally have all her assets, and we can stop pretending we actually enjoy going over there for her boring Sunday dinners. She is too old and tired to fight back." I read that sentence 5 times. I stared at the glowing screen until the letters burned themselves into my memory. In that exact moment, the profound, agonizing grief that had been building inside me completely evaporated. It vanished, leaving behind a cold, unbreakable resolve that settled deep in my bones. The loving, accommodating mother who had sacrificed her entire existence for her little boy took her final breath and died, right there in that lavish dining room. In her place, a fierce, unapologetic warrior was born. An instinct older and stronger than motherhood took over, and that was the instinct to survive. They truly believed I was just a weak, foolish, older woman who would quietly surrender her life and fade away into the shadows. They thought my kindness was a weakness. They mistook my generosity for stupidity. But they had made one massive, fatal miscalculation. I was a black woman who had spent 35 years commanding respect in the toughest high schools in the district. I had battled school boards, faced down aggressive politicians, and fought tooth and nail for everything I had ever achieved. I did not build my wealth by being a victim, and I certainly was not going to let a spoiled influencer and a traitorous son take it from me. I closed the laptop and placed it exactly where I found it. I put the manila folder back in its exact spot on the table. I smoothed out my skirt, took a deep, steadying breath, and looked around the luxurious townhouse. They felt untouchable in this perfect rent-free home, but they had completely forgotten that my name was the only one on the deed. I walked out the front door, locking it securely behind me. I was not going to shed another tear. I was not going to sit around and wait for them to serve me with fraudulent legal papers. They wanted to play a high-stakes game with my life, my freedom, and my hard-earned money. So I would show them exactly how a seasoned principal handles insubordinate, out-of-control behavior. It was time to go to war, and I was going to make sure they lost everything. I walked down the immaculate steps of that townhouse with a posture so rigid, you would think my spine was forged from solid steel. I got into my car, locked the doors securely, and took one final, lingering look at the building. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned a pale shade of grey, but I did not shed a single tear. Crying was for women who had lost hope. I had simply lost my patience. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only person I knew who could match my cold determination with absolute legal precision. Wallace Jenkins had been my attorney for nearly 30 years. He had drawn up my late husband David's will, and he knew exactly how hard we had worked, how many double shifts we had pulled, and how many sacrifices we had made to secure our family's future. When his assistant put me through to his private line, I did not waste time with pleasantries or small talk. I told him I had a situation of the utmost urgency and needed to see him immediately. Wallace heard the sharp, unyielding tone in my voice and told me to come straight to his office without delay. The drive downtown was a blur of traffic lights and city noise, but my mind was laser-focused on the task ahead. I walked into his mahogany-lined office, took a seat across from his heavy wooden desk, and laid out every single piece of evidence I had gathered. I showed him the high-resolution photographs I had taken of Jamal's laptop screen, capturing the vile emails with the shady family law attorney and the fully drafted petition for conservatorship. I explained in excruciating detail how my own son and his wife were planning to use my minor moments of forgetfulness, entirely normal things for a woman in her 60s who was managing a busy retirement, to fabricate a false narrative of early-onset dementia. Then I told him about the 1969 Chevy Impala. I explained that Jamal had stolen the physical title from my personal safe, forged my signature with alarming accuracy, and sold the classic car to a private collector, all to fund a luxury weekend getaway to Cabo. Wallace leaned back in his large leather chair, slowly took off his reading glasses and rubbed his temples. I had known this man for decades, and I had never seen him look so profoundly disgusted. He looked at me with a mixture of deep personal sorrow and fierce professional outrage. He told me that what my son and his wife were attempting was not just a profound moral failure, but a calculated, malicious case of elder financial abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud. They were trying to strip me of my human rights, my autonomy, and my hard-earned wealth, so they could live like royalty. But then Wallace smiled a very sharp, very dangerous smile. He told me that Jamal had made a catastrophic legal error. By forging my signature on that car title and crossing state lines into Mexico, with the stolen funds he had committed felony grand theft, auto, and forgery. Furthermore, Wallace explained the beautiful, unforgiving reality of their housing situation. Because I had loved and trusted my son unconditionally, there was never a formal lease agreement drawn up for the townhouse. Jamal and Chloe had never signed a single legally binding document establishing their tenancy, and they had never paid me a single dime in rent over the past 3 years. Under the state law, they were classified strictly as month-to-month tenants at will. But because they had committed a felony against the property owner and abandoned the premises for an international vacation, my legal leverage was absolute and airtight. Wallace assured me that I had every right to reclaim my property immediately. If they dared to challenge me, retaliate, or move forward with their fraudulent competency claim, he would personally hand the forgery and theft evidence over to the district attorney and watch them both go to federal prison. I gave him the green light to prepare the criminal files and draft the necessary cease and desist orders. I had my legal shield in place. Now it was time to aggressively handle my business. The very next morning, I picked up my phone and contacted a highly aggressive corporate real estate investment group. They were one of those cash-for-homes companies that specialized in closing lucrative property deals in under 7 days. Normally, they bought distressed properties from desperate sellers, but I knew they had a specialized division for premium real estate in high-demand neighborhoods. When their representative arrived at the townhouse an hour later, he was absolutely thrilled. The property was in pristine condition, located in one of the hottest, most desirable zip codes in the entire city, and completely unencumbered by a mortgage. I told him I wanted a quiet, immediate cash buyout with no contingencies. He made a few quick phone calls to his superiors, crunched some numbers on his tablet, and offered me a figure that was more than generous for a rapid closing. I signed the preliminary sale paperwork right there on the expansive granite kitchen island that Chloe hated so much. The moment the real estate agent left the property, I called a professional commercial moving company. I did not care about the cost. I paid double their usual rate for their premium, same-day, expedited service. Within 2 hours, a massive moving truck pulled up to the curb of the townhouse, and a team of 6 burly, efficient men marched inside. I stood in the center of the spacious living room, holding a clipboard, directing traffic with the same authoritative presence I used when running a crowded high school assembly. I watched without a single ounce of emotion as they packed up Chloe's tufted velvet sofas, her expensive ring lights, and her absurdly overpriced minimalist artwork. I watched them march up the stairs and empty the massive walk-in closet, tossing her designer shoes, her luxury handbags, and Jamal's custom-tailored suits into heavy-duty cardboard boxes. Every single piece of their fake curated lifestyle was systematically dismantled, boxed up, and carried out the front door. I directed the moving crew to a storage facility on the very outskirts of town, miles away from the trendy coffee shops and boutiques they frequented. I did not rent them a premium climate-controlled unit. I rented a cheap, dusty standard unit with a heavy rolling aluminum door situated right next to the noisy interstate highway. It was exactly what their betrayal deserved. The movers stacked their expensive belongings floor to ceiling in that dark, uninsulated space, leaving no room to even walk around. I paid the first month of storage in crisp cash, locked the unit with a heavy industrial-grade brass padlock, and slipped the only key securely into my purse. Back at the townhouse, the transformation was swift and merciless. Once the space was completely empty, I brought in a professional deep cleaning crew to scrub the hardwood floors, wash the expansive windows, and wipe away every lingering trace that my son and his greedy wife had ever lived there. A locksmith arrived shortly after and replaced the front door, hardware the back patio locks, and reset the garage security code. By Thursday evening, the townhouse was nothing more than a beautiful, echoing blank canvas. The real estate corporation officially wired the substantial purchase funds directly into my secure private retirement account, and I handed over the shiny new keys to their representative. The house was no longer mine, and it certainly was not theirs, but I was not quite finished cutting the strings. I drove back to my own quiet, peaceful home across town, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. For years, I had allowed Jamal to remain an authorized user on 2 of my premium credit cards. A financial safety net I had maintained, just in case he ever ran into a genuine emergency. I logged into my banking portals, navigated to the account settings, and permanently revoked his access, closing those safety nets for good. Then I logged into my family cellular plan. Chloe and Jamal were both on my unlimited data plan, undoubtedly enjoying free international roaming and high-speed internet, while they drank expensive margaritas and posted vacation photos in Cabo on my dime. With 2 simple, satisfying clicks of my mouse, I suspended their service and disconnected their phone numbers entirely. I severed every single financial thread that tied them to my bank accounts and my life. I poured myself a hot cup of chamomile tea, sat back in my favorite armchair, and waited patiently for Friday morning to arrive. The Friday morning sun was beating down relentlessly on the pristine pavement of the upscale neighborhood, casting long, sharp shadows across the manicured lawns. I stood quietly under the shade of a massive oak tree just across the street from the townhouse. Standing to my right was Mr. Jenkins, holding his heavy leather briefcase with the calm, imposing posture of a man who had won hundreds of battles in the courtroom. To my left stood 2 uniformed city police officers, their presence heavy, serious, and absolute. I felt no nervousness whatsoever. My heartbeat was remarkably steady and slow. I was simply a woman waiting to collect a massive debt. Right at 10 in the morning, a massive black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb, directly in front of the townhouse. The driver popped the trunk and out stepped Jamal and Chloe. They were deeply tanned from the intense Mexican sun, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and expensive linen resort wear that screamed of unearned wealth and entitlement. Jamal tipped the driver heavily, acting like a big shot, completely unaware that he was casually throwing away some of the last spare cash he would ever see. They grabbed their matching monogrammed suitcases and dragged them up the immaculate brick walkway toward the heavy wooden front door. They looked exhausted from days of partying, yet they still carried that familiar, insufferable arrogance, assuming they were simply returning to their perfect rent-free kingdom to rest before executing their plot to ruin my life. I watched in absolute silence as Jamal confidently pulled his key from his pocket. He shoved it into the lock and tried to turn the deadbolt. It did not budge. He frowned, pulled the key out, and jammed it back in, wiggling it aggressively and pushing his shoulder against the frame. Chloe let out a loud, dramatic sigh, fanning herself with her freshly manicured hand. She began loudly complaining about the heat, whining to her husband about why he was taking so long to open a simple door. Jamal muttered something frustrated under his breath and leaned his entire body weight against the wood, rattling the handle violently. When the door absolutely refused to yield, Chloe huffed, dropped her posture, and stepped over to the large front window to peer inside, intending to see if the security latch was somehow jammed from the inside. I watched her completely freeze. She dropped her designer handbag right onto the concrete porch. The sharp, heavy thud echoed down the quiet suburban street. Chloe plastered both of her hands against the glass, her mouth hanging wide open in sheer, unadulterated horror. She started screaming Jamal's name at the top of her lungs, pointing frantically through the living room window. Jamal rushed over, cupping his hands around his eyes to block the harsh sun glare, and peered deeply into the house. The custom-tufted velvet sofas they had financed on credit were completely gone. The oversized flat-screen television, the expensive imported rugs, and the absurdly overpriced minimalist artwork had all magically vanished. The entire first floor was stripped down to the bare, echoing walls. The only things moving inside their former sanctuary were 3 professional contractors in white overalls, laying down thick protective tarps and painting the walls a sterile commercial beige. Jamal started pounding his fists aggressively against the heavy wooden door, shouting at the top of his lungs, demanding that whoever was inside open up immediately. Chloe was running her hands through her expensive blonde highlights, visibly panicking, tapping aggressively on the glass and crying out that they had been robbed by criminals. That was my cue. I stepped out from the cool shade of the oak tree and walked deliberately onto the bright sidewalk, flanked closely by my attorney and the 2 police officers. I called out my son's name. My voice was not overly loud, but it carried the distinct, unwavering authority of a principal commanding a chaotic, unruly hallway. Jamal spun around on his heels. The deep confusion on his sunburned face morphed instantly into sheer, volatile rage. He marched down the brick steps, leaving his expensive luggage behind on the porch, demanding to know what exactly was going on, why his house was entirely empty, and why strange men were inside painting the walls. Chloe followed right behind him, her voice shrill and hysterical. She pointed a shaking finger directly at me and screamed to the police officers that I had completely lost my mind. She literally yelled to the authorities that her mother-in-law was severely senile, mentally incompetent, and needed to be dragged away to a psychiatric ward immediately for maliciously destroying their home. I stood perfectly still. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or react to her pathetic tantrum. I simply looked my 32-year-old son directly in his eyes and let the silence stretch for a long, heavy beat, forcing him to feel the absolute crushing weight of my presence. Then, with a voice as calm and cold as a winter morning, I delivered the absolute truth. You sold my car for a weekend getaway. So I sold your house for my retirement fund. All the blood instantly drained from Jamal's face. The sunburned, arrogant man standing before me turned into a pale, trembling child in the blink of an eye. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some kind of excuse or lie, but no words came out. Chloe gasped loudly, her hands flying to cover her mouth as the crushing reality of my statement crashed down upon her carefully curated world. Mr. Jenkins stepped forward, slicing through their shock with surgical precision. He handed Jamal a thick manila folder. My attorney explained in a loud, authoritative voice exactly what that folder contained. First, he pointed out a printed piece of paper with the address of a cheap, non-climate-controlled storage unit located right next to the noisy interstate highway, along with a single brass padlock key taped securely to the page. He informed them that every single piece of their designer clothing, electronics, and expensive furniture had been unceremoniously dumped into that cramped, dusty unit. Second, he directed Jamal's attention to the official closing documents, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the property had been legally and irrevocably sold for cash to a corporate real estate entity. Third, and most importantly, Mr. Jenkins tapped a copy of a formal police report detailing the felony theft and the forged signature on the title of the 1969 Chevy Impala. Jamal looked at the armed police officers standing behind me, his hands shaking violently as he held the heavy folder. The terrifying realization that his absolute destruction was entirely legal and that he had brought it entirely upon himself finally sank into his brain. I took one step closer to my son. I spoke with a quiet, devastating finality. I told him that the officers standing right here were fully aware of the grand theft auto and the forgery he had committed to fund his little vacation. I explained that if he or his wife ever attempted to contact me again, if they ever showed up at my home, or if they ever dared to file those fraudulent competency papers they had spent so much time drafting on their laptop, I would instruct the authorities to press full felony charges immediately. I promised him, looking deep into his terrified eyes, that he would trade his custom-tailored suits for a state-issued prison jumpsuit without a single second thought from me. Chloe realized in that exact moment that she was completely broke, newly homeless, and married to a man facing severe criminal leverage. The perfect lifestyle influencer facade instantly crumbled into dust. She turned on Jamal, right there on the bright sidewalk, screaming at the top of her lungs, hitting his chest with her fists, and crying hysterically about her ruined aesthetic and having absolutely nowhere to sleep tonight. The perfect Instagram marriage shattered in real time, providing free, highly dramatic entertainment for all the neighbors who were now watching eagerly from their front porches. I did not stay to watch the rest of their pathetic, messy tantrum. I had seen enough to know that justice had been fully served. I turned my back on them and walked away with my head held high. A sleek, black luxury town car pulled up to the curb just as I reached the street. The driver opened the back door for me with a polite nod. I stepped inside, settled into the plush leather seat, and closed the door on the chaos forever, finally breathing the sweet, unburdened air of total freedom. A mother's love is a truly boundless force, but I have learned the hard way that it should never become a blindfold. We pour our entire souls into our children, hoping they carry our values forward. But respect is something that must be earned, and cruelty must always have consequences. You cannot allow anyone, not even your own flesh and blood, to strip away your dignity. Today, I am finally enjoying the peaceful, beautiful retirement I worked so hard for. I am traveling the world, experiencing new cultures, and living my life fully, freely, and entirely on my own terms. I need to ask all of you watching this right now, what would you have done if your own flesh and blood betrayed you like this? I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts. Let me know down in the comments below, and please tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of women taking their power back. Your support means everything to me. Stay blessed, stay strong, and always remember your worth. I will see you all in the next video.